Hi there, and a warm welcome to this, the 234th edition, would you believe it, of Digital Foundry Direct Weekly, our weekly show covering the latest gaming and technology news, probably more skewing towards the gaming this week. Joining me on the panel, first of all, Oliver Mackenzie. Hello.
Yes, Rich, been a bit of a long week, but I'm super excited to join you two for a discussion of all things video games on this fine week.
Okay, and he's back. He's back from Japan. Hello, John Linneman.
Why, hello there. I certainly missed Oliver's Yes, Rich. And I recently saw a fantastic compilation going around featuring all the times he said it. So do check that out. It's very enjoyable. So it's good to see you guys again, though. There's a lot
Welcome back.
Thank you. A lot of cool stuff happened while I was away, and stuff happened over there as well, including an entire game show the size almost of Gamescom, I guess you could say. So
wow. Okay. Well, we'll be catching up with John's adventures imminently. But before that, let's just say that, yes, we are indeed now fully independent. And if you want to support us, please do consider doing just that at patreon.com/digitalfoundry. And of course, store.digitalfoundry.net if you'd like to support us via purchasing our merchandising wares. But with that, let's move on to our first news topic. Well, what can we say about this one? John's already groaned. I haven't even read out what we're talking about yet. But it is the fact that, Microsoft has basically stirred up a hornet's nest and then sat on it by announcing massive revisions to the Game Pass value proposition, which basically, you can't really paper over the cracks here. It is essentially a massive price hike to the ultimate tier, kind of papered over by value-added stuff that people probably weren't interested in. John, you've been a particular critic of Game Pass, I guess, over the years. I guess the sort of, what could you say, the mitigating factor has always been the value. And now there's big question marks over the value. What's your take on all of this?
Oh boy, we have to be delicate with this discussion, I think, because it does kind of feel like Microsoft is just kind of taking fans of the Xbox console specifically out into the woodshed in the backyard and giving them the one over, if you know what I mean. Or maybe you don't, I don't know. It's not good news, I would say. My first thought was like, see, I kind of told you so. But, I don't want to... Look, I mean, the idea, the value proposition that Game Pass represented in the past was inarguably extremely good. And my feeling was always that it was too good. And in fact, there was some potential harm in terms of devaluing the concept of what games actually cost. And when you're offering so many games, including all these day one things for like the price that it used to be, that's just like a ton of quote unquote value, right? Absolutely, no question, especially when you start including like Call of Duty in there, which they did. Like, that's pretty nuts, right? Like, to have one of the biggest games in the world, just like bam, there it is, you get it with your service. But this stuff's not free. Now, I think this could have worked as it was if the install base for Game Pass itself had continued to expand significantly. But I think that they actually do need to they needed more of an install base for this to work in the way that they perhaps wanted. And it feels like they put all of their chips in on this Game Pass concept several years ago, saying, okay, we can't beat the others at their own game, so let's try this. And they did actually find some success with it. The public loved it. The value was insane. But it did not help change the playfield. And unfortunately, they weren't able to necessarily sell the number of units necessarily to keep this sustainable. And I also think that it's, not being on the other consoles, which I'm not sure why they would let it on there necessarily. But if this had been on like PlayStation and Switch as well, I think that could have also kept things going for a while longer anyway. But ultimately what you're dealing with here is like Microsoft has become... So while the Xbox itself as a console, I think, is in a not good spot, I think Microsoft as a games publisher is doing pretty well. and they have a gigantic catalog of games at their disposal and just tons and tons of developers, to the point where that probably makes this whole thing less, sustainable than it was initially when they were much smaller, right? And I think that's just kind of where we're at. So I don't think this is like the end of Microsoft or anything. I think really they're just getting started in terms of becoming like one of the biggest games publishers in the world, certainly in the West side. But I do think we are really seeing like a slow motion end to Xbox as we knew it. And given something else that we've been talking about recently, Rich, regarding like 360 and upcoming anniversary, I do find it genuinely sad, because like there was this energy around Xbox 360. Like they were really in an awesome place there, and it just, it's gone. They never recaptured that again. And
it's sort of like a sort of downward trend, basically, from the release of Xbox One. You had this sort of, I guess you had a nice sort of perk back upwards with Xbox One X, which really was a remarkable machine for the time. But since then, it just seems to have been like, just a decline of the brand, really, and a decline of the success. And you're right, the sort of energy that's sort of surrounding Xbox it's just not really quite what it was.
No. And like on top of that, I mean, I'm getting increasingly worried about just like, especially the Western game industry more than anything else. And Microsoft itself is currently, I mean, they've been through a ton of layoffs. They're not the only one. They're closing studios here and there. There's been plenty of games canceled. They're bumping up massively the price of their big like subscription service. They're increasing console prices. The console sales are down. They're not really selling any units by themselves, and so on. Like I'm seeing all these points kind of out and about there, and it's like, it's all true when you think about it, but it's not like, the PlayStation 5 is certainly doing a lot better, but it's not really setting the world on fire either in terms of like the amount of software available and like the output from Sony and all this kind of stuff, right? In the Switch 2 as well. I would say the Switch 2 is off to a very slow start, with Nintendo seemingly afraid to put their whole foot in the door, and they're kind of like straddling this line between last and next gen. But it all feels a bit negative, and my negativity was only tempered a bit by the experience at Tokyo Game Show this year, actually, which we'll get to later.
Right. Okay. I think it's fair to point out that Switch 2 has been a phenomenal launch success. And like Sony are saying that PlayStation 5 is its most profitable generation ever.
I know. It's just when you actually look at the stuff coming out for them from the gamer's perspective, it's not as exciting as the numbers would leave you believe. Microsoft, on the other hand, is, they don't have the sales or the software, I guess you could say. Like they're struggling on all fronts.
Well, let's just talk about what's happening with Game Pass. Let's just drill down into the specifics.
All right, let's do it.
There's 3 tiers here, but you've got your essential tier, which is going to be $10 a month, which has like a core of 50 games available, unlimited cloud gaming. This is a bit of a weird benefit. In-game benefits, including for Riot games. It's kind of all very sort of specific to have as your third line on your list of benefits.
It's not good.
Online console multiplayer, which is just kind of like a rude reminder that you're paying for core features that PC gamers get for free. And moving on to premium, 200 games, $15 a month. New Xbox published games within a year of launch. So you've got to wait for obviously the key thing about Game Pass in the past was, you would get all of the Microsoft first party output, day and date, which is pretty good. But that's your $15 now basically means that you have to wait for a year or within a year.
Except for Call of Duty. That's a big caveat.
Right. Okay.
Oh, good spot, Oliver.
Yeah.
You get the unlimited cloud gaming, and there's weird in-game benefits as well for Riot's games. Ultimate does give you basically everything that you've previously had for a lot cheaper price. They're upping the amount of day one games, and you're getting Ubisoft Plus Classics and EA Play included. And that's the kind of weird thing, the Fortnite crew.
Oh, baby. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really escape the feeling that they've basically been looking for things to bolt onto Game Pass Ultimate to potentially kind of justify the price increase, but it just doesn't really cut it. You know, a large cross-section of the audience aren't really going to have any kind of interest at all in Fortnite Crew, for God's sake. Indeed, somebody's pointed out that if you're that invested into Fortnite, you're probably playing quite a lot of Fortnite. And so why would you be interested in 400 plus games as part of the Game Pass Ultimate thing? The thing about it is, it's what can you say? It is basically the core thing about Game Pass, the key sort of USP to it, so to speak. The thing that set it apart from the PlayStation offering has always been the fact that you were going to get those Microsoft games coming day and date, and you're kind of not anymore unless you pay a huge increase in price. Oliver, you got a lot to say about this. Crack on, by all means.
Yeah, so I think the price increase here is just staggering to me because as recently as a year ago, I think as of July of last year, Game Pass was $17 USD a month for the Ultimate tier. And now it's $30 a month. That's a colossal increase. They've added a bunch of stuff, but like you said, I think Fortnite is not going to appeal to all players, and I think there's a declining marginal utility as you pile on extra game content, especially archival game content, which the Ubisoft content is mostly older content, games that are, over 3 years old. A lot of games from like the Xbox 360 generation even, they're older titles. In Game Pass, you already have such a huge library of old games to access. Most of the Game Pass titles are indeed older titles, so I feel like the utility of that is fairly low when you already have the Game Pass service. And the reason why I personally subscribe to Game Pass has been for those day one Microsoft games primarily, and they're just jacking up the price of that hugely.
Yep.
Now, I have seen some people note that there is still one remaining service that we haven't discussed today that is potentially quite appealing, which is PC Games Pass. Now, PC Game Pass, it's gone up in price from $12 a month to $16.50 a month in the United States, with no apparent service changes. But it slots in really weirdly into the existing offerings, like it's only for PC. If I Google Game Pass right now, even PC Game Pass, the only results that come up, or at least what they redirect to, is just the regular Game Pass website with Premium, Essential, and Ultimate tiers, which, by the way, all now include PC. For the first time now, Premium and Essential also include PC services, whereas previously the Ultimate tier was the only tier that included both console and PC services. But they don't include anything about PC Game Pass, so I feel like either, in the next 12 months, either they hike the price to the point where it's basically an irrelevancy or a redundancy, or get rid of it entirely. I don't think it's long for this world. I think they're just jacking up the price, and they hope people, don't subscribe to that service and largely go away from that service over the long haul, because it doesn't make sense to give people a cheaper path into PC games on Microsoft platforms if in 12 months the only console platform that you're really pushing is also a PC. Like, it doesn't really make sense in that world to try to have that duplication of services. But I mean, ultimately, just in my opinion, I think it's a sign that Microsoft is done chasing market share. I think they're going to try to soak their existing customers. Their new console offerings, they're not priced to move. Obviously, the ROG Ally at $600, $1,000 is not exactly something that's priced to move, make a lot of moves in the market. I don't think they want to address a very large pool of users, or at least they don't want to address a very large pool of users at the expense of large profitability. And I kind of suspect that that's where Microsoft is headed. And it's also another sign that the Bethesda and Activision acquisitions weren't free. And those games, especially in particular Call of Duty, which, as I pointed out, is being restricted to that Ultimate tier. You're not getting it on the Premium or Essential tiers, except for older Call of Duty titles. Like on Premium, you can get Modern Warfare 2, Modern Warfare 3, Call of Duty World War 2, but not Black Ops 6, not Black Ops 7, if ever, probably not within a year of launch. That needs to be kind of rationalized within the subscription price. And so I think that increase makes sense in that context. But even still, you'd kind of expect like Microsoft to do kind of a frog boiling water situation by gradually increasing the price, making huge headlines by increasing the price by 50% over the span of a few days here, and by 100% over the span of 2 years, because just 2 years ago it was $15 and they increased it to $17 and $20, now $30. It's such a dramatic thing, and I think it gives people a big incentive to move off the service now that price is increased by such a massive margin. So I'm kind of wondering if that was the right move to bundle it with these service increases and increase the price by this margin, or if that actually discourages players from sticking on.
It's an interesting point, Oliver. On Reddit, I saw one of those graphs that did a monthly price comparison showing Game Pass Ultimate versus something like Netflix Premium. And it seems like Netflix has continuously increased in a very linear fashion from, like, say, 2018 through the current day, where Xbox kind of like did this thing where around 2019, mid 2019, the increase was so slow to almost like non-existent up until like 2023. So like they kind of slowed down the pace rather than like trying to upgrade or increase the price. And then clearly they sort of course corrected. So if you trace the line from like the start to the finish, it does, you know, you could naturally see it be a more linear flow like Netflix, but the way they ended up doing it, they basically had to end up course correcting upwards really sharply at the end, which makes the whole thing seem a lot more consumer unfriendly. I mean, I know people complain about the increases of any service, but when you do it very gradually, it does tend to have less of an instant impact. But they've essentially just like kind of almost doubled it, right? It feels like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, from 2023, it was $15
exactly,
US.
Exactly. So from 2023 till now, they've doubled the price, and people do feel that. They notice that. And there was another infographic going around showing Google searches for how to cancel Xbox Game Pass, where it was just like a flat line at the bottom up until this happened, and then it's a massive sharp jump in Google search results. So like, I feel like I mean, I'm sure they didn't want to do this, but something clearly drove them to massively increase the price, and they surely knew like this was gonna hit people a lot harder than a smaller, more typical increase would have, right? And I wonder what this means for the service in terms of the overall user base, whether they actually do end up losing a lot of subscribers, or if it just kind of like there's this initial kerfuffle, people are annoyed, but then they just keep going with it anyway.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a Disney Plus effect to this, where Disney Plus actually started as, you know, pretty good value.
Yep.
Lots of stuff to watch. And then basically the price rises kept going to the point where people just decided they had enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that's basically what's happening here. In terms of the strategy behind it, surely, you know, it's basic maths, right? They've basically been following a strategy of extreme value in order to grow a massive user base, right? And it's not growing. It's kind of plateaued, right? So how do you make more money if that's the case? And the answer is basically to increase the price points. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. But basic economics, surely.
Surely, but then, you know, you increase it so much, then I'm sure they've done the numbers, but like how much is too much in terms of what it does to the user base? Because I feel like they're straddling that line here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's going to be a question for the future, right, in terms of how people actually respond to this. But I do think there is definitely a Disney Plus effect. There was also a comment from Sarah Bond at Tokyo Game Show 2025, reported by Game Watch. Basically, Sarah Bond saying Game Pass took in $5 billion in revenue and said it's a profitable business, and as more creators join Xbox Game Pass, payments to creators increase. So we think it's a good business for creators. So you've got that sort of comment from a senior exec saying, actually, we're making, you know, it's profitable, things are going great. And then suddenly a few days later, you get these gigantic price rises, which suggests that it's not quite where they thought it was going to be, which I don't know. I just think it was a poor comment to make. No, because surely she would have known that these price rises were coming just a few days later.
I think there is some complicated accounting going on here, because Game Pass, I'm sure it's a profitable service if you are including costs that are specific to Game Pass, so the cost of licensing those games from third-party publishers. But how do you account and how do you factor in the cost of first-party development and foregone sales through the Game Pass service? That seems like a separate question. So it seems like there's always been this kind of accounting math kind of fuzziness going on where Microsoft loves to say Game Pass is a profitable service. It's successful. We're doing great. But is that counting the fact that, millions of people maybe aren't going to buy Avowed now because it's on Game Pass? That's kind of an open question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the strategy I thought was that basically those games would make a lot of money on platforms that are not Xbox, PlayStation, etc., in order to offset the sort of loss in revenue they may have been experiencing by putting it on Game Pass for Xbox. But clearly that's not been quite enough, I guess, which isn't great. I mean, we had a lot of supporter comments on this one. Alan from the Discord weighs in with a typically controversial comment here.
Oh, Alan.
Hi guys. Surely this Game Pass price rise is as damaging as the Xbox One launch debacle. In their core market, the USA, the cost has gone from 20-something to 30, basically, and that 30 has a psychological effect on consumers. The only way I can see what Microsoft Xbox is trying to do with Play Anywhere succeeding is if they become the new Google Stadia. I'm not quite sure what that means.
What does that even mean? Yeah.
But in terms of the damaging, well, it is damaging, right? I'm not sure it's as damaging as the Xbox One launch debacle, because that was stratospheric. But I think the issue is with Microsoft is that there's a pattern emerging of bad news, and it actually takes away from the successes that they've had, which has been like a phenomenally good first-party lineup of games. Mm-hmm. But, there just seems to be this continuing sort of trajectory of just really poor news and what looks like bad decision-making, whether it's layoffs, whether it's gigantic price rises for consoles, whether it's gigantic price rises for Game Pass. It's like all of the things that you expect, the positives you would expect from being a part of this ecosystem are slowly but surely being stripped away. Don't Be a Richard says, it feels like in 2025, the year of our Lord and Savior, that Microsoft has had negative press on a monthly schedule, be it repeat price rises, studio closures, staff layoffs, or a general realization by console owners that Xbox exclusives are no longer a thing. Given we have 2 months left in the year, what's on people's bingo cards for November and December? Will Microsoft celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Xbox 360 by pushing out a Red Ring of Death patch to all series console owners to brick their systems? Man, that's harsh. But that brings the other thing is that the meme, $360 a year for Game Pass Ultimate now. That's
the
celebration.
Meme, right? Yep.
Xbox $360. Todd Weitzel, there's a lot of wailing about the price increase on Game Pass Ultimate, but I note that cloud streaming is now included in the essential $9.99 a month plan. Feels like Xbox has added a plan above the existing Ultimate tier and moved everything down market. Has Game Pass Essentials value gone up as Ultimates has gone down? What do you think, Oliver? I think that basically just comes down to whether you're into cloud streaming or not.
Yeah, I think the essential development here isn't cloud streaming. It's the addition of PC support to all tiers.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Previously only in Ultimate, that's a big deal, I think, because obviously if you want to homogenize those offerings, rationalize them in an era where Xbox PC, Xbox as PC, these are key parts of your offerings, you don't want that relegated to just a PC Game Pass offering. The Game Pass Essentials value, I mean, really the benefit there that you're getting is PC. Obviously it's cloud streaming, but for a lot of users, they're just on Xbox. Those aspects don't appeal to them. And for those users, I think Microsoft said there are a handful of games, I think 3 or 4 games that are accessible and essential that weren't accessible a few days ago. That's pretty much it for those users.
Yeah. Interesting question on strategy here from Cookie Butter. What demographics do you think Xbox aims to retain or capture with Game Pass Ultimate's 50% price increase and Fortnite Ubisoft editions? Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I can't think of any kind of reasonable explanation for those additions to justify that kind of price point increase. And I just think there isn't a strategy here other than to essentially make more money. I don't think there's any sort of thoughts about, okay, right, who's this proposition going to appeal to? How are we going to get $30 out of them per month? I don't know. John, what do you think?
I don't know. Maybe board members with kids Or like, yes, we can pay a little bit more, and then the kids can play with their Fortnites and all that. And I don't know, maybe that.
I do think that Fortnite is probably going to appeal to younger players. And maybe the thinking is like, get them in the door with Fortnite crew, and maybe they'll enjoy Gears of War, maybe they'll enjoy the AAA, whatever, down the line.
Are the younger kids going to be the ones spending $30 a month? I don't think so.
Well, it's a high cost of entry.
Like, I feel like this very specifically causes issues where, like, you have parents that are spending Game Pass money for their kids, and all of a sudden it's $30, and they're like, geez, okay, well, maybe we don't need that. Especially since, I don't know, you can still, if you just purchase games one by one, things can be a lot cheaper still. And it's not like kids are playing that many different games anyway these days, by and large.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just looking at the Ubisoft Classics collection. That's the games mentioned on Microsoft's PR here, and man, it's like
Tom Clancy's in there.
Yes, there is. So it goes Recon Breakpoint, Rainbow Six, The Division, Rainbow Six Extraction, but that's kind of highlighting the age of these games and the kind of lack of value. Nobody in their right mind would be saying, wow, let's add on the value of Ubisoft Classics that I must pay every single month in order to play the likes of Uno, Zombie, the original Watch Dogs, Skull and Bones, and Oddballers.
So you're saying you get a quadruple A game for this money?
Well, there we go. Going back to what you were saying about PC Game Pass, Oliver, it's always kind of, there's a reason it's cheap. It's because at the time Microsoft was looking to expand Game Pass as much as possible. And the way to do that was to present, unbeatable value to a gigantic market, which is the PC. Didn't seem to quite pan out. But at the same time, the fact that it was so cheap, in stark contrast to the console user offering, it just kind of suggests that, well, what could you say? Microsoft values PC more than console, which, seems to be still the case, even more so today. But you're quite right. If the future of Xbox is that they're going to become hybrid PC devices, then surely that has either got to go away, or these console-focused offerings have got to go away. Mm-hmm. I suspect you're right. It's going to be the cheaper offering that's going to go away. Any final points to say on this, John, before we move on?
I don't like to see this. We're reaching a weird point where it's coming down to feel like there's only going to be two main consoles left in the race. What Xbox's future seems to still be, very PC focused. So it's kind of its own separate thing at this point. It's not really good for the industry to only have two players that aren't perhaps arguably not even competing exactly in the same markets, right? We needed Xbox. We need something like this in its place. I don't think we're going to get it. And it just kind of shows where the industry's going in the future. So
right.
I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't love it. I don't like to see the end of anything like this. We're losing classic console gaming here with this.
I think, the thing that sort of frustrates me is that there is actually great stuff happening at Xbox. They just seem to be doing a really poor job of telling people about it. They could have done a fantastic reveal of Forza Horizon 6 at TGS. Instead, you got, a rendered video of a bench and some sunglasses.
Was that not the most wet fart kind of reveal you can imagine? I'm sorry. Forza Horizon is an amazing series. I love those games. Those games have been on my games of the year list in the past. Mm-hmm. They're finally doing a Japan-based one, and that reveal was the most just like what the heck. They needed to come out and blow the doors off of expectations, and they could have done something so cool, and instead it's just it's a thing, and they've missed that first impression opportunity, right? That's what gets people talking. When you show something that's really cool right away, people are like, whoa, that looks great, I want to see that, But now they've lost that, and they do this stuff all the time, and I don't get it. They're just really bad with revealing the amazing games that they often have.
Yeah, then there was the whole Ally debacle, basically, where all of the good work in talking about the system was undermined by, the $1,000 price point that came out. I mean, surely, the basics of marketing is you basically get the bad news out the way first and then focus on the good news. That's kind of, surely the way to do it, as opposed to showing this really good device and saying, oh, by the way, it's going to cost you $1,000. Just astonishing stuff. The whole console price rise thing, obviously there are reasons behind it, but it's what can you say? The PlayStation side of things is not being as badly affected. So obviously it makes the PlayStation look a whole lot more appealing. Any final thoughts, Oliver?
No, it's just highly unfortunate that this is going on, and I think it's a sign of where Microsoft is trying to fit in the kind of value ecosystem in console gaming and in gaming more broadly, where I think they've found that they cannot attract this very large market share. They're trying to soak their existing user base, and ultimately doing day one games on Game Pass turns out to be extremely expensive when you have to rationalize 2,000 people working on Call of Duty and fit that into that structure. I just think it's an extremely expensive proposition. And I think it is kind of unfortunate because part of the value of Microsoft services historically has been this Game Pass offering. Since I think 2018 it started, 2017 it started. It's been a huge part of Microsoft's offerings. And I do wonder what the appeal of like next generation Microsoft hardware is if Game Pass is not seen as a reasonable part of it for that ultimate tier of services. And I also wonder how this is going to fare if we're looking at the situation in, let's say, a year or 2 years. You've got an Xbox console that is basically a PC out in the market. Microsoft does not have the PC Game Pass service around, or at least does not have it around in a cognizable form. And you have this $30 Game Pass Ultimate service. On consoles, that's a hard sell. On PC, it's even harder because all these legacy titles that you're looking at now, they're all available for like $2 or $3 on PC in many cases. So the value of that library is a lot less, I would say, on PC. So I wonder how they'll be able to sell those titles to an audience that's conditioned to basically free PC games past 6 months, 12 months, 18 months.
So, Rich, another thing that comes to mind on this, do you remember, not saying who it was, but like 2018 maybe, you and I, we were in London, we were meeting up with a guy from Xbox, and I was discussing some concerns over certain things with like physical media and the future of all this. And he just very clearly said, Game Pass is the future. Oh, said it multiple times, very, very strongly saying Game Pass is the future, to us. And I didn't like what he had to say about this. But it sure did become the thing. And then, thinking about that now after what just happened, I don't know, it just puts an interesting spin on it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that? It was it was during EGX Rezzed.
Yeah, I do remember. Yep. Yes. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, so we've talked about this in the past. There was a rumor that a new edition of the PlayStation 5 Slim would be appearing, and the contentious point about it would be a downgrade in the storage. This model has now appeared, and Austin Evans, who has a track record of like tracking down these new revisions as and when they appear and then basically ripping them apart, has done so again. We do have a new PlayStation 5 Slim. The storage has been cut back. It is now 825 gigabytes rather than the 1 terabyte of the existing model. There are other things about it which are actually a bit more attractive, I think. And it is purely aesthetic from my point of view. It's just the fact that the shiny plastics have now been replaced by fully matte versions, which actually, it just makes the whole console look a lot more attractive from my perspective. But it is a shame, obviously, that you're losing, the one upgrade that the Slim brought about. John, did you have a look at that video? What do you think?
I did, and I completely agree with you that the change to a matte material for everything is a hugely welcome change. I think we've seen it time and again that these glossy materials, glossy plastics specifically, do not age well. You just look at them funny, they gain scratches.
You're quite right, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you literally take it out of the box, and you're like, what? Like, how is there scratches on this already?
The worst one is the VCR Xbox, which, I literally just took it out of the box, and like by the time I'd got to sort of working with it the next day, there were like a whole bunch of scratches on the plastic, which was like, how did that happen?
I always go back and forth between the VCR Xbox and the original PS3.
Yeah, that one was
Those were both
egregious as well.
nightmarish in that regard, like just the worst. And PS5 itself wasn't too bad overall, I'd say, just that
Yeah.
slim section. But still, as Austin shows in the video, like over time, you plug in USB stuff in, that shiny plastic gets kind of boogered up, if you will. And it just doesn't look great. And so like switching to full matte material, I think is going to make it look better long term. So I think that part is cool. Obviously the loss in storage, that's an interesting one. I don't like it's not good, but it's also like not so much storage that it feels like it's like a huge deterrent necessarily. You know what I mean? I feel like if you're really serious about storing games, you're probably going to throw in an extra SSD in there anyway, NVMe drive. So
Right.
still, it's like
Yeah.
wasn't it? It's like 840 versus 600 something, 660. When you compare them in terms of available usable space, right? Like you don't get the full 825 versus 1 terabyte on a system because some of it's used up by the operating system and other things. But other than that, it doesn't seem. He did go over some like thermals and stuff. Do you remember the results on that, Rich?
Yeah, basically, it didn't seem to have a huge amount of impact on what was going on there. The whole thing looks like just a sort of a revision of the existing model. It's still seemingly on the same 6 nanometer SoC, and the power draw seemed to be the same. They just made revisions to the to the internal heatsink arrangement, and also
like the heat piping. It's like rearranged a little bit, and
and the steel sort of internal casing as well has been lightened significantly. So, it is another cost reduction, right? I think the way these things work is they put out a model and there's a certain degree of latitude in how, certain degree of conservatism in the design just to make sure it's going to be okay. And then across the year, they get a year's worth of telemetry that enables them to say, hey, actually, we don't need to do this much, or we could pare that back. It should be okay. And obviously that will chime with their internal testing as well. But yeah, I mean, not a huge story to say here, apart from the fact that you are getting less storage. Austin seemed a bit confused about the fact that the lower tier model has more memory, more SSD NAND flash modules, and that's simply down to the fact that they're smaller capacity modules than the ones that are in the Slim. So you need more of them. I'm assuming, obviously, they're saving money on that. Oliver, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so when you look at this, there are kind of a lot of interesting smaller revisions, like you mentioned, to kind of keep prices in check. I'd assume here they have a lot of telemetry from existing PS5 models, from existing PS5 Slim models. They know how and when their consoles fail, and they've been able to invest engineering time and consult with their production partners, surely. And the result here is a more tightly engineered console, I think, with some cutbacks, some thinner kind of material on the plate there, a fan that is a little bit lighter, probably marginally cheaper, a redesigned heatsink that's a little bit lighter, obviously the smaller SSD. This isn't as stark as like the earlier PS5 revisions. Like the first console revision had that huge chunk taken out of the heatsink to the point where it made people very concerned.
Yeah.
But I think here kind of the conservatism of the design and the kind of light tweaks in the design suggest a close to perfected console here within modern constraints. They're really just trying to iterate on in small ways. I don't think these changes should concern prospective users, because I think Sony is designing their consoles with long lifespans in mind. They have a lot of telemetry. They want you to use their console for 10 years. I think Sony's very proud of the fact they still have tens of millions of users on PlayStation 4 playing their games and investing in their content and services. So I think the longevity of the hardware is a key priority for Sony, as well as getting the price down as far as possible. And obviously that 825 gigabyte hit helps with the price. Now, I did a little bit of research on this, and they're probably saving about $10, $12 in the bill of materials, which is, probably reasonable for what they're trying to achieve here. But there are some caveats, like on PS5, it's super easy to upgrade the SSD hardware with just generic kind of commodity hardware there. And I actually think that the size of games has been trending down in some ways, especially on UE5, like Silent Hill F is 36 gigabytes. Borderlands 4, I think, is 30 gigabytes. Most games nowadays have not really ballooned in size, in part because of the addition of like RTGI systems in many engines. The addition of Nana and UE5, that's certainly been very helpful. So I don't think 825 gigabytes is too small for users to get what they want out of PS5, especially given that like enthusiasts have the PS5 consoles already. These are mostly new users. I don't think they have as strict demands in the storage. And if they're able to fit Fortnite on there, Call of Duty on there, a few other games on there, I think they'll generally be happy. Because you still have a good amount of storage here, right? You still have like 660 gigabytes odd of storage. That's going to be enough for a fair number of games adventure on the PS5 hardware.
Yeah, I think something which was pointed out by Video Games Chronicle this week is that the arrival of a new model is actually causing, certainly in the UK at least, price cuts on the existing models. So, yeah, basically the Slim has a retail price of £430 in the UK. You can actually get one now from multiple retailers for like £329, which is pretty great, I think.
That's a great deal now.
And the Slim with the disk drive, retail price $480. It's down to like $425 in those same retailers as well, which is pretty good. Obviously, not massive price cuts for a 5-year-old console compared to the original launch model, but even so, bearing in mind the kind of trajectory of prices going up and value going down, I think that's not too bad, actually.
It's getting down into like Switch territory somewhat.
Right.
I
think the point is, though, that Austin's kind of demonstrated that there's no real, unless you really like matte plastics like we do, there's no real advantage for waiting for the new model.
The only thing he didn't do that I'm disappointed on is I wanted to get his opinion on the taste of the liquid metal. He didn't try it, You always wonder, like, did they improve the taste of the liquid metal so you can sip it in your cocktail?
Yeah, and there was a distressing lack of a drop test.
Yeah,
which seems to be part and parcel of phone coverage, phone review coverage. Let's do
actually,
as well.
I do want to say,
let's drop some consoles.
Oliver, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I hadn't really thought about it. But like, the PlayStation 4 was a really reliable console in the end. And I think that's a pretty cool thing to think about, because like as consoles are getting more powerful, like the reliability had been trending downwards, I would say, right? Like both 360 and PS3, especially those earlier models, it's like garbage tier reliability, just absolutely awful machines. They don't last. Like they would all break in time. PS4 though, even I still have a launch machine here. It works fine. So my one with PT on it that I bust out from time to time. And in fact, I would also say that Sony did good on the Vita as well from that era. Vitas have held up surprisingly well, even from the battery perspective. Like there's, and in fact, one of the weird trends I noticed in Tokyo is like Vita prices are on the rise big time. Like people are looking for Vitas, man. They're offering big money for trading in Vitas, and the prices of them are going up. People are like getting nostalgia for the Vita. But either way, like that whole Cerny generation of Sony hardware now that we're in, by and large, seems to be fairly reliable systems. Probably, I would say, the most reliable in Sony's history. I mean, PlayStation 1, 2, and 3 all had their share of major reliability issues. 1 and 2 being primarily disk drive problems, right? And then 3 just being, I think the RSX or the Cell that would basically just die.
Like the RSX I think and that lead-free solder that really hurt everyone back in that era.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
that was certainly an issue.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I think we're going to get a pretty good spot these days. And the same is true of Xbox, right? Like since Xbox One. I mean, the Xbox consoles have also been very reliable. So
I think it's pretty much since a certain revision of 360 that Microsoft machines have been pretty much bulletproof.
Man,
obviously less said about the early ones, the better.
I kind of want one of those final generation 360s at some point. The one that you know the one. It's like the
360E.
The E,
I believe it's referred.
All right, Rich. Let's move on. I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Let's move on. Okay, next news story of the week. Oh, this is an interesting thing. We have not one, but two developers who have created native Steam Deck versions of their existing games. Now, back in the day, native Steam Deck, yes, it's pretty awesome. Now, back in the day when it was first announced, it was like, oh, wow, all of these PC games are going to be going through Proton compatibility layers. There will be problems with that, etc., etc. Except it turned out that Proton turned out to be pretty awesome to the point where, you know, nobody really felt the need for doing native Linux games specifically for the Steam Deck. And yet today we have not one but two. The first one which came to light was a native Steam Deck version of Baldur's Gate 3, which was apparently driven by an individual within Larian who just wanted to be able to play Baldur's Gate in a much better state. The second one is Cronos, the recent game from Bloober Studio. And I can't say that I've done exhaustive testing of both of those games, but I did test them. And you can test them because both of them side by side, as we're doing here, simply because, you just go to the properties of each game. It will by default load in the native Linux version of the game, and but you can just sort of swap back to Proton, and it will go back to the standard version, the standard Windows version, which goes through the compatibility layer. I'm going to talk about Baldur's Gate 3 first because, the results here I think are really, really good. It sort of stands up everything that Larian was saying about it. If we look at the right here, you can see, first of all, there's two tests here. This one is kind of like Alex's benchmark for Act 3, which, historically Act 3 in the city of Baldur's Gate has been a massive crunch point for pretty much any PC. But you can see here that, there is clearly a performance advantage running the Linux version, which, it is notable. It is coming out with those parallel lines there. And I'm seeing a 15% performance advantage in favor of the native Linux version over the same version of the game running through Proton. But the real story here is actually in the frame time graph, where, it is pretty stuttery even still on the Linux version, right? But looking compared to what's happening on Proton, holy crap, we've got some frame times there well in excess of 100 milliseconds, and that's been cleaned up dramatically compared to the Linux version, which is so, add a frame rate cap to the Linux version, and I think you'll be in even more good shape there. So that's Alex's benchmark that he often wheels out. So the second benchmark that I tried was the benchmark that I used, first of all, when devising some memory testing, and then we converted that into an automated benchmark for our CPU test run. But I'm doing things manually here. So this is another part of the city from Act 3 in Baldur's Gate 3. Quite a bit more challenging, I'd say. There is actually a frame rate advantage, obviously, to the Linux version here. But I think the big thing, again, is just that the frame times are just totally disastrous. I've actually got a range of 0 to 160 milliseconds, and that doesn't fully contain all of the stuff.
Yeah, I see that. Wow, it's horrible.
There is a 10% performance advantage, but it's not really about the actual frame rates here. It really is about the fact that it's far, far more consistent on the native Linux version there. So this is really, really awesome, right? I mean, I didn't quite expect to see the frame rate advantage, possibly because you're no longer going through the Proton compatibility layer, but the fact that so much of the stuttering is mitigated here, this is pretty awesome. And I would say that it makes the whole experience of playing Baldur's Gate 3 on a Steam Deck in what is the most demanding area, actually pretty good.
And I think that's the very important key to note there, right, Rich? Like, this city is the demanding area, and the rest of the game runs a lot better. So I'm curious, did you actually see how it runs outside of the city?
Well, limited testing time, but obviously it's a case of, let's go and look for the CPU limited bits and see just how bad or good it is. And, what can I say? I mean, this is really, really good work. So kudos to Larian.
Conversely, though.
Yes, let's talk about Cronos because this one is weird. Now, it's basically a game of two halves when we're looking at this. What can I say? We can add that to the what can I say mega mix that's doing the rounds at the moment. Yes. In a GPU limited situation, we're using the initial sort of cutscene from the beginning of the game here. There's no real difference between the Proton version and the Linux version, which kind of makes sense, I think. Ultimately it's going to be just delivering the same instructions to the GPU, and it's the same driver, so it kind of makes sense. What's weird here, though, is that once we actually move outside of that cutscene, how can I say this? The Proton version runs significantly better than the native Linux version, which doesn't make sense to me. There's a clear performance advantage here, and I have that to, basically the Proton version 18% faster, but that's actually doing it a disservice, because whenever you're hitting the 60 FPS cap, then obviously the Proton version is being throttled, so to speak, by VSync. So I don't quite understand how the native version, which bypasses the Proton compatibility layer, which does have a CPU overhead, is actually producing worse results. And this is one of those things that I really hate with Digital Foundry testing, is that when you get a result that just doesn't make sense whatsoever, you instantly think, well, actually, that surely the fault can't be of the game. It's got to be my fault. I've done something wrong in the testing. So I actually ran this one 3 times, but I got identical results each time. So I don't quite understand what's going on here. The Linux version that you're seeing on the left there is the default one that will appear, that will be installed if you run Cronos.
One comment I want to throw in here, Rich, and I'm curious if you can explain it. I noticed that all the UI elements in HUD are much sharper on the Linux native version versus the Proton side, right?
Right.
And I'm wondering, is there something going on in terms of resolution, or like the front buffer versus back buffer and all that? Like, just the fact that there is a difference at all makes me wonder about what we're seeing here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm curious about that as well. But what can I say? Maybe it's simply the case that it's tuned to the Steam Deck in that regard, and maybe the Proton version isn't. I'm not sure, but that's an interesting thing that you've pointed out there. I mean, it is the same settings, 720p, very low, upscaling being used.
The image quality in general, to my eyes, looks slightly better on the Linux version. Like the edges are less, like they're just sharper in general, not as blurry. So I'm wondering.
I wonder if there is. Maybe there is some sort of configuration difference in there. I'm not quite sure.
Right, because you definitely match the settings, but like right when he comes up to the green door, for instance, and you can see him side by side, you can look at the buckle on his arm, on her arm, and like around the helmet area. It's much cleaner on the Linux side.
Right. Okay, interesting. It could be a GPU difference then. I mean, these were the same. Here's the thing, the way I did it was to basically run the game, first of all, with the native version, which is, the default, so to speak. And then you sort of swap around the compatibility thing on the Steam front end, and then reload it, and the settings remained the same.
Right.
And so it should be the same, but there does seem to be some sort of lower resolution thing going on the right hand side, which may explain it. I have to do. You're making me do another recheck here, John.
Apologies, Rich.
Yeah, let's just make it 4 times. Just why not? maybe that is the case, but I don't know. Very, very strange. There is a difference between the native version and the standard version in terms of options. It's only a small change as far as I could see, but XeSS is supported on the Proton side, but it's not supported on native Linux, which is probably an XeSS thing rather than anything to do with the developer. But ultimately, 2 different games, 2 different results, and I think Baldur's Gate probably the more impactful one, bearing in mind what they've done here in terms of actually making for an improved experience. And secondly, just the fact that I just love this story of one guy within Larian who really wanted to play Steam Deck a lot more smoothly, play his own game more smoothly on Steam Deck, and actually put the effort in to make it happen.
I'm surprised that a developer on a game like that wants to play his own game, to be honest.
Just going back to the Cronos thing, though, John, I'm just thinking of those first 2 clips where actually the performance is identical. It's weird.
Interesting.
It's weird, isn't it? It's very, very weird. Something's going on there that isn't quite right. But who knows? Any thoughts, Oliver?
I mean, it's bizarre. The performance is like literally, like almost literally to the frame identical. That is very strange, and it's just something's going on maybe which we don't understand. Now, this testing, I'd be curious to see if the testing, not to create any more work for Rich, of course, I would hate to do that, but if it would be any different on low settings, which is a more substantial, the UE5 feature set is totally there. Looks much more like itself on low settings. The game is really stripped back visually, much more like the Switch 2 version.
What, low or very low?
Or rather very low. Sorry, the names are slightly confusing. But I think in general, like with titles like Cronos, with titles like Baldur's Gate 3, perhaps at least in more demanding areas, the issue is like less the lack of native versions, because I think Proton is very good and very performant, especially when you're not dealing with like ray tracing and stuff like that. And it has relatively low overhead. I think the issue is just like the Steam Deck hardware, even though it puts in Herculean efforts, it is fairly weak. It has a fairly weak GPU. It has a fairly weak CPU. It doesn't have a ton of memory bandwidth. Obviously, it doesn't have these nice features that we talk about a little bit here with the more advanced AI upscaling and whatnot. But it is also just generally not a very performant piece of kit. And there's a level at which games don't scale. And I kind of feel like, for me at least, Cronos is past the point at which I'd want to scale games on the Steam Deck. It's still a very interesting exercise. Baldur's Gate 3 is maybe a bit more of a Steam Deck title, but obviously in that Act 3 Baldur's Gate area, it is super, super heavy. And it is super unfavorable to almost any piece of like Zen 2 based hardware you can throw at it. It's just not a very clean experience. But at least, in this case, it is improving the Baldur's Gate 3 situation a little bit, but much less so, obviously, with Cronos.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Okay, with that, let's move on. Okay, next news story. There was a report this week that there's going to be a new version of the DualSense controller for the PlayStation 5. There was talk of it appearing in the revised version of the PS5 Professional. This new controller, this new version of the controller, essentially a DualSense that had a replaceable battery. Now, initial reports were suggesting that it would be shifting to something similar to Xbox support for AA batteries, but it turns out that it's more likely to be simply a version of the existing battery that's more accessible and easy to switch over. Had this supporter question here from Sam H. External batteries for the DualSense. How much is it and where can I get it? I'm tired of having to switch between controllers whenever one needs a charge while playing the one that's already charged. Having AA batteries for the DualSense is a welcome addition, so I'm not worried in case the internal battery dies forever. I think there's 2 points on that. There are always concerns with Sony controllers that the battery isn't easily replaceable, so over time it does degrade and it's not so easy to replace. Oliver, it looks to me here that it's more a case of trying to introduce that level of longevity as opposed to convenience while gaming.
Yeah, I suspect that's the case, especially considering like these are rechargeable battery controllers. You just plug them in. There's no great hindrance to the use of the controllers like you might have with a 360 pad or an Xbox One pad, with you needing to switch out or switch in these disposable batteries. I think in this case, it's a rechargeable unit, so it's much less of an issue there. But I think this is a great development because it extends the life of PS5 controllers, and presumably it will also let you swap batteries as needed, though I'm kind of curious to see what kind of configuration they go with, like if they have a little hinge, a door cover on the back that is actually easily hot swappable, or if it will be like a screwable compartment. I looked up the current process for replacing a PS5 battery, and it's very involved. You have to like remove the R1 button, you have to use a spudger to open up the back of the unit. It's a whole ordeal here, so certainly any improvement in that respect would be very appreciated. My only concern here potentially would come down to capacity, because a sealed battery can be quite larger. It can be quite a bit larger potentially. Now, in a controller, I think Sony could probably find room for a larger cell because it is a more capacious design and typically less space-efficient design, but it would still be probably smaller than a sealed-in counterfactual, so that is one concern. But I think in general, like we were talking about earlier, it just shows kind of some of the dynamics in the console sector, or at least in hardware, I think they have a strong incentive to extend device longevity. And in an era where, PS5 consoles could be viable and being used for games for, I imagine, 12 years or 15 years from the date of purchase, they want you to continue having obviously working and functional PS5 console hardware, and that includes the controllers. And yeah, on like the PS3 end of things, at least, those controllers are all gone at the moment. You have to swap out the batteries pretty much universally on that kind of older class of hardware. I think that's what Sony is trying to prevent here.
Yeah, I guess my only concern about this is whenever I'm looking at Amazon, I see a whole bunch of like replaceable batteries. And whenever I buy a third-party one, it seems to be the case that it's actually not very good, not as good as the original.
Every time.
So, and obviously the choice there is, okay, well, I'm going to definitely get an officially branded one, and they cost like 2 to 3 times as much. Anyway, that's just like my sort of gripe on that. John, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think it's great. We need anything to improve long-term usability of these products is good, I would say. Because, yeah, like batteries don't last forever, obviously. We're seeing early DualShock 3s, or I guess, was it 6-axis controllers have certainly reached that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they were still replaceable internally. But like, that's why I've always argued that I liked Microsoft's approach with the AA battery, because you could still swap in a battery pack for charging, but you always had this option to just throw in some AA's, which is super useful if you've not touched a controller in a while and you just want to play some games. Actually, the worst though, and conversely, even though you can change the pack, the freaking Wii U, man, you can't do anything with that stupid tablet. And if it's dead, you're just like, you're kind of in trouble. So, yeah, just great. It's good news. I'm curious to see the form it takes, but I'm happy that something's being done at least to make it easier.
Yeah, there does seem to have been like a small but significant shift within Sony to increase the longevity of the products. For example, the classic little latch there that makes it much easier to replace the battery, for example. Inside the main machine. I think that was a really cool thing to do.
Oh yeah, that is cool. I agree.
But I guess the question is whether it is going to be a really simple way to switch batteries, or whether there's still going to be like screwdrivers involved to unlatch it and stuff like that. I don't think it's a big deal either way. I do think any kind of improvement over having to remove basically dismantle the controller and remove the R1 button to get at it. It's going to be a big improvement there.
Yeah.
I guess we just have to.
I want to see them add
like
a battery slot, like a UMD drive, so you can shoot the battery out the top. That'd be sweet.
Well, that was always the sort of cool thing with the PSP, right? You just took the back off.
Oh, it was ready to go. Despite that, it looks super sleek, right? You can't tell really if there's a battery compartment there. So it comes off real nicely. Very easy to replace. Thank goodness, because those batteries do blow up eventually.
Wow. Okay. I guess that's all we got to say about that. We have more to say, I suppose, when we actually see it, but I just hope it is sort of much more easier to sort of facilitate the battery transfer. Okay, let's move on. Final news story of the week. John is back. He has been in Japan. He did visit the Tokyo Game Show, and wow, you've put a whole list of stuff on the docket here that you want to talk about. So where do we begin? Well, let's talk about Tokyo Game Show, because you were there. You did attend. Yes. I guess you saw some games.
I did, and I think the first thing I want to talk about is just like TGS is back. It's the feeling I got this year. It was huge. They were sold out. The crowds were like old school Tokyo Game Show style, like the one we remember from many, many years ago. Just the number of games there, the sheer volume of games on display, both big and small and everything in between. It was up. There just was like a buzz and excitement around games in general that really was awesome to see. I was really, really happy with the way that turned out in that regard. And yeah, along the way, of course, got to play some games. I've talked about some of these elsewhere, but I should talk about them here as well. Like, first of all, I got to play like Neo 3, for instance, which was cool, from Koei Tecmo. I think it was the first time it was playable. They've sort of stuck with their classic engine, but pushed it to be much larger in terms of the environmental scope, and they had like a massive selection of PS5s all set up playing this game, and it was quite solid from what I played. It looked noticeably better than the other ones, despite the increase in scale. So I was really happy to see that. It's more like it's like a little bit. My take is like it's a little bit of Elden Ring rubbing off on Neo, if you will, but it's still instantly harder than anything from Software, I would argue. These Neo games, man, especially Neo 2 was, and looking like this one as well. They're brutal, but good. There was Resident Evil 9 there, which was finally shown running on Switch 2. And I think this one was actually, so my take, so they only allowed you to see it handheld mode, so I didn't see what it looked like docked. And my take is that the frame rate was kind of uncapped, where they were targeting, it was closer to 60, I would say, than I expected, but it was not like super stable 60, but they might get there actually. But the overall like visual quality, like running on the Switch 2 screen, despite the Switch 2 screen kind of sucking, the actual visual quality looked amazing. Like it genuinely looks like, at a glance, you're like, wow, this actually looks like the PS5 version overall. I will say the biggest cuts I noticed actually comes down to things like hair rendering, which I think, PS5 and PC that we saw had the strand hair system that they added from RE4. Switch 2 definitely does not seem to have that. It's very noisy and angular. Yeah, but like they usually do great with cards, and I think they were less good in this instance. So it also got me wondering about whether we're going to actually end up seeing a PS4 version. I'm starting to think we might actually. And if we do that, though, you won't get ray tracing. So this does seem to at least have the RTGI in place, from what I could tell. So like the lighting and everything looked really, really good. And in fact, like the whole game, this is just a small little chunk of the game. It's a little tiny sliver that they've revealed. So we don't know what the overall scale is going to be, like how it's going to scale up in terms of the level sizes. But right now, this is boding very well for RE Engine games on Switch 2, I would say. The fact that we've got the latest version already looking like this, running on the Switch 2 in portable mode. We never got here with Switch 1, right? Like they did the streaming versions of some RE games, but those were awful. And they never got RE Engine games really running, not the high-end RE Engine games running natively on Switch 1. So this is great to see. I'm happy about that.
That is cool.
Another great game I want to mention is Dench Attack, which was revealed during the Jeff Con Gamescom edition. Awesome. During the pre-show, the developers were at the TGS and showing it off. And
that's great.
There's a couple things that really stuck out. First of all, it looks and sounds amazing. It's super fun. It's like this weird mix of like the Boost Sonic games mixed with like Tony Hawk-ish style concepts, but it's so fast. It's so fast to the point where I was surprised when they told me, it runs on Unreal Engine 5. And yet, despite that, running on, even on a Steam Deck, it's like super fluid, super high frame rates, and amazingly like no visible stutter, despite traversing these gigantic environments at a ridiculous speed. Like, obviously they're not doing Lumen or Nanite or anything like that. And Lumen actually wouldn't really be great for a game moving at the speed, I would argue, because it would never be able to coalesce into a solid image. It would just be noise. So, but it's super sharp, super awesome looking, running's really, really well right now. And it got a lot of buzz I could feel at the show, which I think is just awesome to see. So people are really stoked for this. The devs are really cool. And there was actually just a ton of indie stuff there as well. I forget the exact name, but do you remember, Rich, that at Gamescom they revealed that one game? It was like the VKKKK or something, like some big mech game that was like with a very strange name. They actually brought the full, like it looked like a full mechanical setup, like a giant like 70s era looking like cockpit thing. So everybody was coming to sit down and play the game using this huge freaking cockpit, which was absolutely cool looking. So they had that set up and going. In fact, this year at TGS, the Indie Hall was so big that they had to expand up into the top area of the show floor, outside of the main floor. Like they built an entirely new space just to house all the games because there was too many applicants this year. So that kind of shows just how much was there. And of course, the big booths were there. Everybody was big represented. We went around Sega a little bit. I saw they showed off some of the new Virtua Fighter stuff, but same basic area. That's looking great, very promising. I played Yakuza 3 Kiwami, which is, it's the Okinawa one. That also shaping up really well. Still using Dragon Engine rather than Unreal, thankfully. They only did the one Unreal game. I think Dragon Engine kind of wins out for me. Just nice 60 FPS. Looks really attractive visuals all around. Yeah, so that was all good. I got to do I was with my buddy Thomas, and he set up some interviews with the Neo guys as well as the head of Omega Force. And so I got to do my debut as doing kind of an interpreter, which was really cool to be able to do that, and successfully pulled off these nice interviews going from Japanese to English and back. So that went really well. And the Omega Force one was just awesome. Like because he wasn't there to promote any specific new game. And they couldn't really talk about the Hyrule series too much because it's not Koei Tecmo's IP, but we just reminisced about the old PS2 days. And like he's like, they were originally just going to make a fighting game sequel to the Dynasty Warriors fighting game on PlayStation 1. And then I think it was like programmer named Suzuki-san came up, like he realized, oh wait, there's like this crazy simulation we can do on the PS2 hardware to get like a ton of dudes running around. And they just like, what can we do with this? And started to come up with these ideas to make this game. And despite Kessen, the strategy game from Koei, also having big crowds, they were actually developed completely separate, and they started development at exactly the same time. So it was just a coincidence that both of those teams stumbled upon this like whole big crowd dynamics thing. And the guy we talked to, which was now the head of Omega Force at the time, he ended up doing all the level designs for Dynasty Warriors 2 and the UI stuff like by himself. So they did announce a remake of Dynasty Warriors 3 / Shin Sengoku Musou 2, and he didn't even want to do it. But apparently fans have been requesting it, and he realized like, hey, anything older than Dynasty Warriors 7 is not playable on modern platforms, so let's go ahead and do it. And so they kind of did this whole rebirth thing. It's not just visuals, they're making changes to the core mechanics to make it more modern, and it's looking pretty good. So that was good. So TGS in a nutshell, just a lot of cool games on display, a lot of energy in the area. I was only there on the first business day, but I understand it got even crazier the next few days. And you can imagine a sold out public day, what that might look like. Kind of like Gamescom, actually.
Wow, but okay.
So
I'd rather not imagine that, to be honest.
We also got some other fun stuff over there. I visited the Tatsujin office, which is headed by Yuge-san, who was famously one of the key members of Toaplan. I don't know if you guys know Toaplan, but they were a very famous game company back in the day that essentially created the modern vertical shooting games, right?
Yep.
Like they did so much and they were so influential. And when they broke up, they formed other big companies like Cave, right? Like the remnants of Toaplan became all these other fragments that like expanded that whole genre. So like these guys were shooters, and they're making a new one called Tatsujin Extreme, which was shown initially 2 years ago at TGS, and it was not in good shape. I called it the widest shooter ever, where it felt like it was a widescreen vertical shooter, but it felt like meandering from one side of the screen to the other took like a year. So it was very, very slow. I played the latest build, and like the difference is night and day. It is so fast and fun, and it has this like co-op mode that I played with Thomas that was just like, basically you imagine a vertical shooter, your buddy gets hit, he goes into like this limp state where he can be killed if he gets hit again, but if you fly over to him in time, you trigger one of your bombs, and it also sort of like brings him back from the brink. So there's like actually like a real co-op element to it, where you're like taking on these levels, but when your friend needs help, you actually have to go get them, which I don't recall ever seeing in a vertical shooter. So
nice. Well, these guys are hardcore, right? Toaplan. I mean, you'd be talking like Tiger Heli Slap Fights, the hilariously named Slap Fight from back in the day. Hellfire, of course.
Hellfire, Batsugun, Zero Gunner. We actually asked Yuge-san about the infamous "all your base are belong to us" line.
Okay.
He was said actually for us it was like super embarrassing translation.
Why? Oh, well, because
they knew the translation was bad. But we were like, dude, it became legendary. Like, people love that game because of that. So they've kind of accepted it into their hearts now. But when it initially hit, it was like, oh, this is really embarrassing. We did a bad job. But thankfully people love it. So it's just cool to see these guys working again like this. And like, I got to talk to, a musician who worked back at Kaneko back in the day, and he had some fun stories as well. It's just like dripping with history there. Like, these guys just want to make cool games. And I think Yuge-san himself said, like, oh, I have no plans to retire. I'm just going to keep making games until I die, basically.
Right.
Which some of these, I get it. Like, that's what he wants to do. Like, he doesn't want to stop doing this stuff. So he's just going to keep going. I think that's great. And speaking of legends, I also got to join Mitsuyoshi-san, the famous Daytona singer and musician who also did the Shenmue soundtrack, among many, 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 many others. He's been at Sega for ages. He's just like, his whole career has been nothing but Sega. I got to join him for a live stream on the Sega Sound Team channel, which was really, really fun. You can check that out. We did the stream in Japanese, but it has auto-generated English subtitles now if you want to watch it. I was really happy to join them for that and talk about some TGS stuff.
Nice. Also
visited the M2 offices again, but didn't really see anything new this time. I was just catching up with those guys and all their amazing work. They did the Gradius Origins collection, Night Striker. They're doing Night Striker gear, which is something I plan to cover at some point as part of a larger video. So yeah, that was good. And of course, lots of retro game shopping. So
tell me more. Come on.
Well, you mentioned Slap Fight. I finally got a Slap Fight MD. So
wow.
For the Mega Drive, which I wanted that, and I got it for significantly less than half the going rate that it typically fetches. So I could add that to my Mega Drive collection. Really happy about that one. Got a few other deals. I got like a very cheap copy of Panzer Bandit for PlayStation 1, which I'd been looking for, which is sort of like a 3D action, 3D graphic, but side-scrolling action game with sprite-based characters. That's pretty sweet. We went out shopping. We actually went out in cars this time. So driving out into the countryside. I'd insert credits own Brandon Sheffield with us.
Oh, cool.
Who we just had a great time just like going through all these different shops. He was digging deep in the vinyl section with his like phone up there, like listening to samples and just like picking up like so much like city pop and other things. It was quite enjoyable just to go out there and do all that. So all in all, I mean, what can I say? It was fun. I had a great time. Met lots of great industry people. The 8-4 party this year was great. I also did the 8-4 podcast while I was there. So that's another one worth checking out. Yeah, I love the industry vibes happening over in Japan right now. There's a lot of energy there that had been missing for a while. And it feels like it's like Japan is back on the rise in terms of just like really creating awesome stuff. And that's great.
You bumped into Yoshida-san, didn't you?
That's right. Shu Yoshida at the party there. Very briefly. I finally got to chat with him in person. And it was nice. He still does remember us, indeed. And including that PlayStation launch video I did with Audi some years ago. So, which was one of my favorite videos we ever did. Oh yeah, super nice dude. I was really happy to talk to him, and maybe we'll see if we can get him on here one of these days. Now that he's free of the shackles of Sony, still.
Good stuff. Well, when are you next going back?
I'll probably go back next May. We'll see, because they moved Bit Summit up to May this time. I want to go to Bit Summit, but it's usually like July, and it's in Kyoto, which is like stupidly hot. Like over 40 degrees C with extreme humidity. And my body's just like, nope, I'm not doing that. So the fact that they've now moved it up to May makes it like suddenly like, maybe I can go now.
Fair enough. Sounds cool. I'm glad you had a good time anyway.
Yes, thanks. And you guys did a good job keeping down the fort. I noticed lots of great content flowing. And most importantly, there was so many people that I got to meet that just love what we're doing. And it made me feel good about what, like, the content we're all creating, like that people actually do seem to care a lot about it. Especially when you hear stories about like how, like, just somehow we've helped people get through difficult times in their lives, and just like having these regular voices talking about games in the way that we do, just like it's like this like friendly voice, a little window into this like this little portion of the games industry that people really enjoy. So I'm really happy that we can provide that. So, and a lot of people wanted to see Rich. Like, is Rich around? It's like, no, I'm afraid not. He hasn't been back in Japan for quite some time, I believe.
Yeah, I'd say it's 25 years.
Yeah, you were there during the Dreamcast era, right?
The last time I went was actually just before the launch of the PlayStation 2.
Wow. That's a legendary time to be there, though.
Yeah, it was, because the Tokyo Game Show do you remember they had those giveaway discs for the PlayStation 2?
I do.
It might have been, I guess it was 2000 that I went. It probably wouldn't have been 99, I don't think, when those discs were being given out.
Did you get them?
Yes, obviously, of course. They're lost.
Because, man, I want the GT 2000 disc, because that's...
yeah.
I did actually stumble upon a Ridge Racer 5 disc from that PlayStation event, the demo disc version. It was like, it cost me like $1 if I do the conversion. So I couldn't help but grab it just to have at least one remnant of that event. But no GT 2000 disc to be found, alas.
It's a shame. Yeah. The funny thing is, of course, is that when I actually got back to the UK and showed people GT 2000, they weren't actually that impressed with it.
No, I mean...
But to be fair, it wasn't anywhere near as good as the actual game.
That was what made GT 2000 so interesting, because GT3 itself ended up looking a lot better than GT 2000.
People were just sort of looking at it saying, well, it's certainly a bit higher resolution than the game I just played on a PS1, but is that it? Yeah. And obviously the rest was history when the actual game came along.
Oh, yeah.
It's just amazing stuff. Okay, well, amazing stories there. Thanks, John. And look forward to, I guess you're looking forward to your next visit there.
You bet. Absolutely.
Seems to be like a spiritual home for you, for your gamer side, so to speak.
Seems to be these days. Now that I've spent so much time getting back into the language and everything, it's been very satisfying. Yeah. And Japanese developers and musicians, and they're very eager to talk and share stories. It's just you need to be able to speak to them. It's really that simple. And it feels a lot more open and friendly in a way than the West, which is like super guarded behind like closed PR doors and regional branches and stuff. You know what I mean? It's just easier to get access to people where you're like, wow, like it's amazing. I can just come up and talk to you like this. Where in the US, it's like, no, not a chance. Like he's going to be sequestered behind multiple doors and PR people. You cannot speak to this man.
that's for sure. Yeah. Okay. Great stuff. Okay. Well, that's all the news we have for you this week. So let's move on to supporter Q&A. Okay, so that's the news done for this week. So let's move on to supporter Q&A, which is the part of the show where every week I post on our Patreon asking users to submit their questions and give us their comments on the topics we're going to be discussing. This question comes from Kback. Hello, digital found for human beings and fellow aliens. What? How many tears were shed by Rich and John after seeing the disaster that is the Panzer Dragoon Zwei remake, and how one of the most beautiful games of all time has been insulted? And then he supplied a YouTube link here. John, it's not out yet, but you have seen it. I haven't shed any tears yet because to be fair, I did just look at that video. It's pretty shocking. But what's going on there?
Actually, yeah, you kind of get an impression when you look. So Pandemonium on the Sega Saturn Shiro YouTube channel, which is an awesome channel. They actually posted a proper comparison. But I certainly didn't need a comparison to understand that this is Forever Entertainment back at it again, doing what they do. I don't know what black magic they work to get all these properties, but they essentially create what I would describe as like, I don't know, like budget tier I'm not saying they use AI, but it reminds me of like an AI like take on an existing property where like it just lacks any sort of real visual identity, flair, or atmosphere. Like the entire vibe is just gone in a way that it makes me feel like they don't actually understand the source material. This was true for the first Panzer Dragoon remake. It was true for the House of the Dead remakes, both of them, which they don't play bad, but they just don't look right. And there's so many little things they get wrong. Also, the Front Mission series, which, by the way, that did use AI, and it was horrendous. They remade Front Mission 1, 2, and 3. Not good at all either. And this continues that trend. Like, it's just... So, right away, they get the color palette wrong. They get the camera wrong. The FOV is too wide. It doesn't help capture that sense of speed. The animation, the way the dragon moves, completely wrong. The shadows, it doesn't convey that sense of place in the environment that you have in the original. Like, just everything just feels like just this like generic like attempt at copying a classic. Like, we've already seen what more detailed Panzer Dragoon looks like with Orda on the original Xbox, right? Like, they perfectly captured this mood of this game with that sequel on the Xbox. I think that was the evolution of the visual style.
Yeah.
They didn't look at that, it looks like, or they didn't understand it. But just everything about it, man, like the sense of scale's wrong, the art's wrong, the colors are wrong, the animation's wrong. Everything about it feels slow, uninspired, and just like you're just left looking at it like, why? Like, yeah, the Sega Saturn version, it's very dated technically, but you can tell even from a modern perspective, the way that they drew those graphics, it still creates something that feels very strong and impactful in a way. You just look at it and say, oh man, this looks cool, and you can really appreciate what they were doing on the hardware at the time. And the second one, it just looks like, what if we just used, like, I'm not saying they did it, but what if we just like visited the Unity asset store and found things that vaguely look like Panzer Dragoon and slammed it together? I don't know what they're doing there, man. I really don't understand it. I assume that Forever Entertainment has found this niche by lowballing studios and then sweeping up these rights to create things for a very low budget, because that's what it looks like. But if you're going to do it in that way, like, I just don't understand why you'd even bother, because this just creates a negative impression of what was a beloved game.
Well, who's going to buy this thing? It's going to be the people that really love the original,
right,
and kind of want to see a sort of good version of the game for modern platforms. And well, I'm not saying I'm crying, but it's not really what you'd want.
Interestingly, Panzer Dragoon 2 on Zwei on Saturn also already has a widescreen mode, if you didn't know.
Right.
So that was one of the few games on Saturn that actually had proper widescreen support to begin with. And it's just like, I just keep coming back to this camera. Like, the way the dragon is viewed in the original, it's very close to the camera, and it's like angled in a way where the movement through the world just feels fast and fluid. It has an impact. Whereas in the other one, the new remake, it's much further away from the camera, and it just doesn't seem rooted to the ground. It looks like, so those early PS2 Sega Ages games that Sega put out, like Outrun and Afterburner and all that, and Space Harrier, where they just had this generic, ugly art style trying to replicate the original mechanics. That's what this looks like. And I don't get it. And I'm sad that this is the team doing it. I'm sure, like, I'm not saying the people working on the project are like lazy, etc. I'm sure they're putting in the work to get something. I mean, it is 60 FPS at least, but like they need better art directors. They need people that really understand what they're doing here. I think they could salvage it if they had those people, but they clearly just don't. And they don't get what the original goes for. That original look and design. And as a result, it's just, they've created something that I don't think anybody really wants.
The dream scenario is that you kind of reassemble the team from back in the day to if they're still in the business, to kind of like give their new, what you might call a definitive version for modern hardware.
That would be...
even if that isn't possible, the guys like Night Dive prove that you can actually do a tasteful version of these
Or
games.
Night
that
Dive, sure.
modernizes.
But then, we saw stuff with like Sonic Mania, Shinobi, Streets of Rage 4, passionate developers. The Game Kitchen with Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, which is amazing. These guys like freaking understand these classic games. They understand what made them good. They know how to create something that fills that niche. We know that there are developers that can do this very, very effectively, and that's not the case here. So I really don't like what they've done, and I hope that I hope they stop with this. I don't want the Panzer to go away. I'd like somebody else to pick it up and continue.
So, who owned the rights then? Presumably it wasn't Sega then.
I think they do.
Or was it? Really? Wow.
I'm pretty sure they just like licensed out the IP. I think.
Okay.
As far as I know, that's what it is. If I click on Steam, what do we got here? Well, that's weird. Maybe not. I don't know. So the publisher is Forever Entertainment, but developers listed as Megapixel Studio SA and Storm Trident SA. So I don't even see mention of Sega here. So the nature of all this, whatever they're doing, is kind of a mystery to me at this point. Will require more research.
The camera side of things, I think, is what is actually sort of makes the game just look a lot slower.
Yeah, exactly.
By pulling the action back, it just doesn't look as exciting.
Not at all.
Basic stuff, really. Let's move on. This question comes from Edna Mode. The Outlaws port on the Switch 2 reminds us that machine learning hardware, custom silicon, and low-level apps paired for that silicon trounce laptop APUs running DirectX and Proton. I'm excited to finally have a handheld console that is running at a higher wattage paired with silicon manufactured on a newer node, and I'm wondering if the upcoming PlayStation handheld can theoretically produce better results than Strix Halo handhelds. With its better optimization and better architecture, I can see ports like a future Outlaws that run better when optimized for the PlayStation handheld than on the GPD Win 5, which currently has. GPD 5, it's basically Strix Halo handheld, which is like obscenely powerful, but also requires a lot of power to get the most out of the silicon. There's a review of that on the Forks YouTube channel. I recommend checking that out, but obviously we'll be looking at it in due course. But Oliver, the point being made here is essentially that, actually sort of games targeting a specific style of hardware can produce some pretty spectacular results, as opposed to just using PC ports running on x86 silicon. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. In general, having that kind of console-like optimization time, along with like next generation PSSR, that could certainly be helpful, as opposed to the Strix Halo stuff, which is just running PC code. That is often a less optimized experience, often a less optimal experience, I would say. But there are a lot of questions as to what the PlayStation handheld might be at the moment. I think the core of the rumors would suggest that probably at reasonable wattages, the handheld would be more comparable to Strix Halo because it is an RDNA 5 design. It is using next generation GPU architecture. It does have extra efficiencies, and it is based on a 3nm process. But I kind of question as to whether it would be comparable at something like 45 or 50 watts. That seems like a pretty large thermal gap to breach there. And I'd suggest that probably, when you look at the Fox's testing, maybe something like a 25 watt Strix Halo, a 30 watt Strix Halo, something more in that kind of range in terms of graphics performance would be more realistic, perhaps. I'm just kind of spitballing here because we just don't know on the GPU side. But the GPU side is more understood than the CPU side, and I think that's kind of another wild card here, because Strix Halo is essentially 8 Zen 5 cores at reasonable clocks when gaming, hooked up to, a pretty good memory interface. Whereas the PS handheld was initially reported as being maybe 4 Zen 6C cores, or the more recent rumor is 4 Zen 6C cores and 2 Zen 6 low power cores, just for the operating system and background tasks and things like that. So is that sufficient? And what are the CPU clocks in that scenario as well? So I think on the GPU side, it's maybe a little bit more explicable just because there's a pretty obvious range of what they'd be offering. On the CPU side, it's a little bit less obvious. And I also think that if the intention is to target 30 FPS in a wide range of software on the PlayStation handheld, they could scale that back somewhat. And on Strix Halo, you have that additional configurability, that flexibility, because you can have up to 16 Zen 5 cores, obviously 8 being operational during gaming. So there are some questions there. I still think Strix Halo is going to look pretty impressive when the PS handheld launches. I think it's still going to be a pretty good set of kit there.
Yeah, I think I know what Ednamode's getting at here. When you look at Switch 2, it is definitely producing better results than what we saw with our simulations on RTX 2050. And I think a lot of that is down to just developers specifically targeting that hardware and no other hardware. And it's certainly paid off. I'm still quite amazed at what Cyberpunk 2077 is doing, for example. And certainly Star Wars Outlaws has much to commend it as well. I can see that sort of advantage of talking to one specific piece of hardware as having, it's not really down to the specs as such. It's down to what the developers are going to do with those specs. And I think it probably will pay off. But of course, the sheer brute force performance of the Strix Halo has got a lot going for it. I'm really looking forward to seeing what it is capable of. But I do think that ultimately at lower wattages, it's kind of like a midpoint between Series S and PS5. And when you get into the sort of 50 watt area, you're in the fun zone. That's where you can basically have your PS5 quality equivalent settings, but maybe with pared back resolution or more aggressive upscaling, but it will look like a portable PS5, which I think is the crucial point there. But that testing is to come, and obviously we've got the Asus ROG Xbox Ally X coming soon as well, hopefully. So yeah, certainly lots going on in handheld mode, in the handheld world. John, what do you want from a PlayStation handheld?
The fun zone.
Fun zone. You want to be in the fun zone?
I want to be all the way in the fun zone. I mean, fundamentally, I want to see them make it so that PS5 games are playable on this thing, and like create like a seamless library somehow.
Yeah, I think that would work.
That's ultimately what we need and what we want here. Like for this to really take off, I think it needs to be that, right?
Okay.
Like they can't just release a separate device. They can't just say, "Oh, it plays PS4 games." It needs, at this point, it needs to be the full fat experience.
Absolutely. That said, if it is just able to just run back compat PS4 games at 1080p resolution, I think that'd be awesome because that catalog is so good.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. But
you're right.
Going forward, though, I think it's important that newer software is playable. And since we're expecting a very, very, very long cross-gen at this point, which makes sense now, unfortunately, given how things are going, may as well, right?
Okay, let's move on. We've got a couple of questions here which are basically asking very similar things, so I'm going to group them together. The first one comes from Marcus. Hello, Foundryman! Alex has just released his incredible video about DLSS on the Switch 2, which made me somewhat curious about DLSS from incredibly low internal resolutions and maybe more generally upscaling from low internal resolutions using high-quality upscaling solutions like DLSS or FSR4, which is perhaps most relevant on handheld gaming devices. With a number of Z1 and Z2 Extreme devices coming out or already out, what tips can we take from the Switch 2 in how to optimize games for these devices? Should we use post-process sharpening to make the overall perceived image quality better? Do you think there is space for a quote-unquote lightweight FSR4 model, or would that just be FSR 3.1? Thank you for your time. This one from Jats Cracker. I often get the idea that maybe some of these usernames are just designed to be read out to make me look stupid, but maybe not. Anyway, good day, gents. AMD's handheld chips desperately need a better upscaler. With the testing Rich is doing on the FSR4 int 8 version, do you see it being viable, or does AMD need an FSR4 Mini like Switch 2 and DLSS? Let's quickly talk about some of the testing I've done. I've sent some videos to Oliver here for inclusion, but then, basically what we're seeing here is the Asus ROG Ally at 30 watts running at 720p and then 1080p, and we've got native 720p and then 720p with FSR3 AA, native AA, and then FSR4. And basically what you're seeing here is the same internal resolution, but then you can see the frame rate drop with FSR3 and FSR4, and that drop quantify that drop, and you've got the cost of FSR3 and FSR4 respectively. So let's take a look at the numbers. This is basically the cost of that on the Asus ROG Ally, 30 watts there. FSR3 at 720p, the cost of it is 1.8 milliseconds of render time. Now, bear in mind, 60 frames per second, 16.7 milliseconds of frame time overall, 30 frames per second, 33.3. I'd say that 1.8 milliseconds is actually quite reasonable. FSR4, however, that goes up to 3.34 milliseconds. So FSR4 is considerably heavier, like 50% or whatever. Let's talk about 1080p now. Using FSR3 just for anti-aliasing adds an additional 4.5 milliseconds to the frame time there, and it's plus 7.4 milliseconds on FSR4. Now, obviously, you're not going to be using those things on a handheld at native resolution. You're going to be basically running at much lower resolutions, but that cost, 7.4 milliseconds of FSR4, you've basically got to claw back via lower internal resolutions much more than 7.4 milliseconds to make it worthwhile. Which basically says to me that, this version of FSR4 that we have, it is early. It wasn't supposed to get out to the general public. It works fine on the desktop side of things, but maybe the cost is quite significant too significant maybe for a handheld device. But, who knows really how it's actually going to be deployed by AMD. What we have had of statements from AMD saying that they really want to have FSR4 working on handhelds. It works, but it's extremely heavy. But what do you make of this concept in general, Oliver?
In general, I think that something like FSR4 can be very expensive on handhelds, like you point out here. I think even just the cost of regular FSR2 or 3 can be prohibitive on kind of regular handhelds, like not Strix Halo, i.e. not Strix Halo. When you look at something like even the Steam Deck, when you're targeting a 720p output or 800p output with FSR2 or 3, the cost can be, in many cases, such that you can't really get that much of an advantage relative to native res rendering. Even on something like a ROG Ally device, on a Z1 Extreme ROG Ally device, the cost there can be fairly prohibitive for 1080p rendering unless you're pumping up the TDP quite a bit. So I think in general, this kind of approach that we need to have, probably for those devices, it's more of like an FSR mini style approach. When you do look at the Switch 2 there, obviously you're seeing great results out of a console that is using, in Alex's words, a pretty poor upscaler relative to its PC alternatives. I think it's not doing a very good job. For instance, Alex is pointing out, it's not really doing any anti-aliasing or upscaling when objects are in motion, when things are in motion. That's not very good. In stills, it delivers very good image quality, but obviously in motion, that's quite critical. So I think, in general, having cheaper upscaling would help a great deal. FSR4 is not militating in that direction. FSR4 feels like a technology that's more suitable for like these higher TDP modes, maybe like a Strix Halo device. Alternatively, one kind of compromise you could make with an upscaler like FSR4, which is higher quality but lower performance, is to accept sub-native upscaling in some cases. So, going to 720p instead of 1080p. 1080p is still a pretty high resolution for these handhelds, I'd venture, unless you're looking at the Strix Halo devices, which are kind of a new category of performance well above existing handheld devices, rather. Right. But sub-native upscaling can look good on Switch 2, like we've seen from titles like Street Fighter 6, can look pretty acceptable there. So I think that's another avenue for improving performance. But I kind of don't think, based on your existing testing here, that FSR4 is going to be like the super clean handheld win that people are expecting, especially if you look at existing upscalers. It's not a super easy performance win necessarily in every case.
I also think you can't just judge this stuff on the face of it based on what we see with larger screen displays, right? Like the one I always go back to is the way Tekken 8 works on Steam Deck, where I find that using something like TSR at a lower resolution produces a better perceivable image than FSR2 at a higher resolution, both targeting 720p, right? Mm-hmm. So like you wouldn't necessarily always expect those types of results on a large monitor, but when you're playing on a handheld screen, like your view of what is acceptable changes, I feel. And sometimes combinations of settings can look different
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Another sort of visualization here, I haven't sent it to Oliver yet, but I think I will, is just to show that, looking at this Cyberpunk benchmark, for example, if you sort of scale back FSR4 from FSR4 quality to FSR performance, there's still not a huge degree of win there, to be honest, compared to native rendering resolution. So looking at the Cyberpunk benchmark, this is actually medium settings, and we've basically got 55 frames per second, 720p native. And FSR4 performance, 66 frames per second, which is like 20% performance advantage over native resolution rendering. That's not particularly great, is it? That's not a huge game-changing win. And that's using, a 30-watt configuration there. So maybe there is a case for a sort of lighter weight version. I'm also thinking about the PlayStation handheld, of course. Of course, it could well be the case that the PlayStation handheld will just be very, very good at machine learning. We're expecting that, right? So maybe the computational cost of an FSR4 equivalent would be considerably less impactful than it is on an RDNA 3.5 device there. I don't know. What did you make of Alex's video there, Oliver? Because bearing in mind you've done the lion's share of Switch 2 testing, particularly on games like Star Wars Outlaws and stuff like that. I mean, and again, with your testing with Fast Fusion there, John, I mean, you kind of showed that DLSS wasn't really sort of a magic bullet, and we kind of now know why. It seems to be the case that in motion, there's not much upscaling and there's not much anti-aliasing happening with this sort of tiny DLSS. Even so, I don't know. It's not as if we had a huge amount of complaints about Star Wars Outlaws image quality, but, compared to standard DLSS, it's clearly a lot worse.
And honestly, if you're talking about fast, again, there was the whole thing where they added that pure mode, which got rid of all those features entirely. And it didn't look great. It still looked worse in motion than the DLSS did. So, there's still something going on there. But fundamentally, yes, as Alex kind of deduced, the main benefits of the DLSS are only really visible when you're not moving. And as soon as you hop into motion, I mean, it's almost like they planned for the screen to be as blurry as it is to hide these issues.
That was my response to when I talked to Alex, but having first viewed the video, it's like, well, actually, this tiny DLSS kind of should look pretty good on a handheld screen, because when everything's in motion, you're losing most of the clarity anyway.
Yep. It reminds me, I mentioned this to you, it reminds me of what they did with Killzone on PS Vita. Right. You recall where the image quality jumped back up to native res when you stopped moving, and then it would,
because you wouldn't notice the frame rate drop,
right? And then it would drop as soon as you start moving, essentially. And it was pretty cool, actually. It worked okay. So I don't know. Interesting.
Any final thoughts, Oliver?
No, I think it's a little bit tricky to evaluate, because it is like a low quality upscaling solution relative to anything that exists on PC, relative to anything that exists on console, any kind of traditional, temporal upscaling technique that we see on those platforms. But in titles like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, titles like Fast Fusion, titles like The Tourist, different kinds of games here, I think you would rather have DLSS than not have it, even in this limited form.
Absolutely.
And I do like having a pixel precise match in some content, or a high resolution upscale on some content, going to 1440p docked, going to 1080p handheld. That's not really possible with the regular DLSS model. So I think for this specific low power use, it can be good. And, if you have motion blur in there, maybe the breakup isn't so noticeable. In some games, it depends on the art, right? If you have a lot of high frequency detail, a lot of foliage, things like this. In Hogwarts Legacy, for instance, it's going to break up pretty badly. But in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, it's actually reasonably clean looking in a lot of respects. You just get that extra edge detail. You don't get so much of that fizzling. So it looks pretty decent in that case, I would say.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. Let's move on. This question comes from Bjorn Hard. Hello, independent gentleman! Exclamation point. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how well the PS6 will sell. Could its launch and reception be similar to the PS5 Pro? For me, the PS4, PS4 Pro, and PS5 were all day one purchases, so I thought the 5 Pro would follow this trend. But even with a 4K TV, I'm finding myself holding off on the purchase. I'm really curious to see if there'll be any pre-launch announcements from Rockstar showing what the PS5 Pro will bring to GTA 6. That could be the thing that pushes me to upgrade. This led me to question if the PS6 will be an enthusiastic day one purchase, or if I, along with others, will instead hold off and wait to decide if the upgrade is worth it. Oliver?
Yeah, well, that's certainly an interesting question. I think that in general, it doesn't matter. I'd venture to say it does not matter in a gigantic way to Sony. I think they probably care more about engaged users. Indeed, when you talk about, Sony having the most successful console generation so far, that's including a gigantic swath of PS4 users who are still engaged, like we discussed earlier.
Right.
So I think Sony is happy. If you're playing your Fortnites, if you're playing your Call of Duties, that's great in your older platforms. If you're playing maybe newer games in the PS5, if you're continuing to invest money, I think they're happy. They're happy with their overall base of users continuing to grow, or at least be in the hundreds of millions of users, whether that's on PS6, PS5, or PS4 consoles in general. For GTA in particular, I think they'll talk about PS5 Pro if they have a Sony marketing deal. Usually developers don't talk a whole ton about PS5 Pro necessarily, unless they are like a Sony published title, a Sony sponsored title. And if they have something appealing to talk about there, I think they will talk about it. So far, it seems like they're using a TAA plus FSR1, something like that. But I also don't know, GTA 6, GTA 6 is getting released, I think, on May 26th, 2026 or so. And I'm not sure if next-gen PSSR will be available by the time that releases. So there could be a bit of a question mark there in regards to timing, if they would actually have time to integrate like a better quality upscaler or something that would substantially improve the experience. But in terms of whether the PS6 will be an enthusiastic day one purchase, I think it will be a cross-generation console. You're going to get better frame rates, you're going to get better resolutions, you're going to get ray tracing enhancements in some games. I guess it's up to you as to whether that's an appropriate upgrade. I think it'll be kind of similar in a lot of respects to the PS4, PS5 cross-gen period, except it will last a very long time, I suspect. So it's going to depend on the person, but I don't think Sony is opposed to you just sticking with your PS5 hardware for a long time to come.
Right. I do think that developers are actually gearing up for what would be probably the longest cross-generation transitional period ever, which would be quite a thing, bearing in mind how long cross-gen persisted for this generation. In terms of excitement, I mean, it's in terms of what constitutes a day one purchase, it's all about the games. You've got to show the games. That's the bottom line. That's the reason for upgrading. But what do you think, John? Do you think Sony can put it off?
It remains to be seen. I mean, we're at a weird point where games just, they've become too expensive and too time consuming to make. And so like the traditional console cycles that relied on exciting new software, showcasing new hardware, it's really, really difficult to do that these days. And so I really do think we really are in that sort of like iterative hardware cycle. And more so than even with PS5, it's like, I feel like it's just going to be figuring out a way to sell this to customers in a way that's interesting enough. But you're not going to be able to do like the traditional, here's the next generation kind of upgrades. And at least I don't think so. I just don't see how that's possible given what it takes to make games. More power just isn't that interesting anymore. Right. That's not,
I think my take on it is that there will be kind of like what we're seeing now, where there's kind of like a path-tracing implementation for certain games, and then there's kind of like the standard implementation. Mm-hmm. And obviously the path-tracing thing could be a lot more interesting going forward once you've got a proliferation of devices that could actually capable of running it, or enhanced ray tracing or something like that. Because, it certainly can be a game-changing difference. And we're going to have these machines which will have an awful lot more processing power, graphics processing power, but certainly a lot more when it comes to ray tracing machine learning features. The problem is, if you're looking at ray tracing and machine learning as enabling a new type of experience, how does that sit with cross-gen, which has got to be accommodated? It's going to be really, really tricky, I think. certainly going to be a challenge to actually evangelize a new generation of consoles if you're still going to be producing pretty much all of those games on the machines you already own. I suppose we will be seeing possibly the end of 60 FPS performance modes on the older hardware, kind of what we saw, with the last generation, where it was like, okay, these run at 30, these ones run at 60. I don't know. It's really difficult to tell, except, it seems to be the case that RDNA 5 is considerably more powerful than, the machines we've got at the moment. But the question is, how are we going to actually see those
what are you going to do with it?
Games enhanced? Yeah. And I think Bjorn Hard here is pointing out that, hey, the PS5 Pro is delivering an experience for enthusiast users. And that argument is not going to hold water for a whole new console generation. Interesting stuff. Okay, let's move on. Question here from 1040 STF. Hi folks, the release of the Mario Galaxy games in HD and 4K reopens in me the debate about what a good remaster is. Don't get me wrong, I'm super happy those games are available on modern platforms, but the art style of the Mario Galaxy games on a Wii plugged into a CRT looks like a cartoon with very rounded characters, rounded backgrounds, and a big depth of field effect revealing the level design one step after another. Here, everything is sharp. Every character and level has edges everywhere, and even objects and levels in the far distance have perfect focus. Doesn't feel like the art style of the Mario Galaxy games Nintendo's team created back then. It feels a bit cheaper now and way less coherent. Shouldn't games from the CRT era always get remakes made for flat screens and HD/4K instead of remasters, like Silent Hill 2, for example? John, what do you think about this?
Wow, it's a lot to unpack there. I mean, they're right that Mario Galaxy on a Wii looks great plugged into a CRT, but I also think the big problem back then when the Wii was relevant is that most people were switching to dog tier LCDs, and the Wii looked especially bad on them. It was really, 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 really bad. And so this is still going to be a big upgrade over that. But basically what he's saying is like, and this is true with anything going back. When you take an older game and you increase the rendering resolution, you reveal all the faults, basically, right? And to get around that, he's like suggesting more of a remake instead of a remaster, which I think that's a big budget question, right? The creation of Silent Hill 2 remake is a very different thing financially compared to what they did with Mario Galaxy. And I don't think they necessarily want to or need to do that, because I still think, even though it is pin sharp now, it's still an attractive game. It's a Wii game, but I think it still looks nice. But I mean, this is absolutely always been the case. Like, you go back to like PS2 games or whatever, like on a CRT, like the polygon density seems really high. Like, everything seems super detailed, but then you upscale that to like 8K on your PC, and it's like, oh, every single polygon becomes visible, and you see all the faults that you couldn't see before. And I think I've always been of the opinion that just arbitrarily boosting resolutions on older content is a bad idea, and it generally doesn't look good. And that the better approach is to make the edges smoother and clearer and less free of noise, rather than just like increasing the clarity of it, right? So it's just a matter of approaching things a little differently. And I think there's ways to do that could look really good on a game like this.
Do you think there's like a more intelligent way of handling these assets then?
Absolutely, yeah. I think so. At least having a screen mode option to like sort of like try to, I don't know, maybe a soft depth of field for distance stuff, and a bit sharper up close, or like their own sort of like older screen filter style. Like, there's some interesting possibilities here. I actually always like I like displaying games at their original native pixel resolution, but like downsampled from very high resolutions. It gives it a really cool looking quality. It's really, really nice, especially on like PS1 era games. It's really great.
What do you think about this, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with John's sentiments there. I remember playing Mario Galaxy originally and greatly preferring the way it ran even in like 2007 on my CRT versus like my 40-inch Sony Bravia. But I've played a bit of the game on my Switch too, and I think it looks pretty good. I think the models can look a little chunky, but the updated texture art I think looks decent, and the lighting is mostly pretty reasonable, I think, at the high resolutions. I don't think the outcome that they have on Switch 2 at least looks that bad. I think it still looks pleasing. I think probably some of the greater issues for older titles come in titles with more realistic visuals, because I always felt like Nintendo's art style from the Wii era actually scaled okay to higher resolutions. So I don't think it's that offensive looking, but I definitely think they could have done something additional on top of what they did do to make their game look really nice on Switch 2.
Let's move on to the final question of the show. This one comes from question generated by Jensen GPT. Everyone knows the famous photo of John's 2006 PC setup, which has become famous across the internet, even to people who have never heard of Digital Foundry. John, can you talk about that setup and tell some stories about games you played on it or projects you completed? Does anyone else in the DF crew have photos of their retro PC setups? Well, that last point, I can just say no. I don't. But John, this photo, I mean, it's astonishing. It caught the imagination of the internet. It's become a meme. You very rarely get credited for it, but it is your PC. It is your photo. Tell us more.
Yeah, so that was my basic setup from about 1999 until I left that house. So that was back in my parents' house. That photo was actually taken after I'd been away. I lived in Japan for a year, and before that a little bit in like Michigan. So, but I kind of left that. So that's like a time capsule of the room, circa like late 2004 or so. And then when I came back before moving again in 2006, I took this photo. So this is actually taken in 2006, but the basic setup was very similar. I always had I had that corner desk for a long time. When I first got it, I think I was using like a Pentium 2 system, and then I continued to upgrade that through the years. I went from a 17 to a 19-inch monitor. That Samsung monitor, I still have it in my parents' basement. It's cool. It has a little slide out tray with all the controls on it. You click in. I really liked that display. I could do 1600 by 1200 on there, which is nice at the time. That is the setup where I first experienced games like, Doom 3, Half-Life 2, Far Cry, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, of course. That TV corner, that's where my consoles lived during all this era. I played a lot of games in there. I mean, I was that I saw during. So I first set that up after the Dreamcast was out, because when Dreamcast first came out, I was playing downstairs, and I finally got this kind of, but it was like a Panasonic 20-inch TV, and I upgraded the TV a few times. And this one here was the last one I did in that room, which was a 27-inch Sony HD TV capable CRT, because I was all in on the 480p's for like Xbox and GameCube and a little bit of PS2. In retrospect, as it converts like 240p and 480i weirdly, so it wasn't the best choice, but I liked that TV. It's nice, and it's again still at my parents' house. It's still there, still works. It is there. I mean, like pretty much the entirety of the PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube generation I spent playing games in that setup, which so it does, it's quite a nostalgic place. I wired up my Klipsch speakers in a weird way, where I just had 2.1 stereo on the PC, but I used the surround sound channels sort of like up above, but one in the other off-screen corner of the room for the console setup, so I could always have sound coming from them as well. That was cool. I mean, it wasn't just me though. My younger sister, she was like super hardcore into games as well at the time. She was the one that put like thousands of hours into Morrowind. I remember when Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines come out, I would go to bed at like midnight, wake up at like 5 a.m. and she's still at my PC playing that game. Stuff like that.
I just did a Google search for John Linneman retro PC photo.
Yeah.
And actually came up with a result from you on Twitter. X rather, as we're supposed to call it these days.
Yeah.
The tweet reads this: "We've reached a new level. This place posted my old setup on Facebook, but the version of the image they used was watermarked by a different account." Who puts a watermark on someone's Wega? And I just had a look at the photo, and the watermark. Somebody has indeed watermarked it, and it's at Millennial Misery.
Amazing, dude. Oh, I can't believe they did that. They put a watermark on my Vega, dude. Like, I'm not down with that.
That's shocking. Yeah, that really is outrageous. It shouldn't be done. Oliver, retro PCs. Do you actually factor into the conversation at this point? Bearing in mind that you're a lot younger than us.
I do actually. I was just looking through my iCloud photo library, and I have surfaced a picture which I've sent to the two of you of my setup, circa 2007 or so. So I can take you through that there. Kind of starting from the top left.
Why are there so many? Why are there all these spots on the camera lens?
Oh, I don't know. This must have been a point and shoot back in 2007. This is not a fancy camera. So on the top there's a 40-inch Sony Bravia, and then going down there's a TV tuner, and then HD DVD player, an original Xbox 360. Amazing. Yeah, very nice.
With both remotes, you have both the included remote and the long remote that you bought.
I do. Good, nice find there, and some Xbox controllers in addition to those remotes. Below that, I have a launch PS3, which I actually still have. It's right there, although it has some issues sometimes with some games and crashing, but it still works. And then on the PC side, I have some speakers, a 16 by 10 Dell monitor, and some nice desk and a chair and all that good stuff. So I actually think this holds up. This is a little bit less of the era, I would say, than John's. It looks a little bit more modern. There are still some aspects of it that definitely don't hold up in retrospect. Like that television looks rather chunky, even if it is a flat panel. And those early kind of Bravia LCDs in general, in addition to the chunkiness, in addition to the weight, in addition to the relatively small size, like that was basically the biggest one that I'd ever seen, and it was 40 inches. Right nowadays, that would be considered very small for a television. They also just had horrible image quality, like the contrast ratio was terrible, the brightness was terrible.
That's why I was rocking a 50-inch plasma during that era.
Exactly. I think that would be far preferable. I'm still kicking myself because the decision was, I remember it was between a 34-inch Toshiba HD CRT and a 40-inch Sony Bravia. And I was insisting that we do the HD CRT because it had the best, I didn't really understand the difference between those two panel types, but it had the best reviews on all the sites. So I thought we should go with the HD CRT. Right. But my mother militated for the Bravia, so we got the Bravia. And it's very nostalgic finding this image. But maybe a little bit less visibly retro than John's setup. It's more visibly retro if you just look at like the television and know the age of some of the electronics, but it actually does not look that far out of line with something that I would like today.
The proliferation of this photo means that it might even outlive you.
That's a good point. Actually, I just noticed some other things so one of the things about my setup that's interesting is that I actually did keep older consoles in the mix. You see the Dreamcast there, but there's also a Sega Saturn down there. But in addition, my PS2 is set up vertically, sitting on an Acer box, which would have been the laptop from my work. Right. It was an Acer laptop, and for whatever reason I used the box that it came in as a PS2 stand, which is funny. And what else about that setup? That old silver PC case I use for many builds. The wires under the desk are a nightmare. Like, good Lord. There's a white Japanese Slim PS2 on the desk that's connected, which I like. There it is. Happy days. That room is still in the family. My sister bought that house when my parents built a new one, so she's still there.
Amazing.
But the desk is long gone, sadly.
And the PC.
The PC's in my parents' basement somewhere. Like, all the electronics survived, basically, and all the games, of course, I have here in Germany. Mm-hmm. So amazing. None of that stuff got thrown out or like sold. So it's still around.
Amazing. Okay, well, that was the final question there for the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it. Ring bells for notifications for you and potential algorithmic boosts for us. But of course, it is all about the DF supporter program. So please do consider supporting us. Patreon.com/digitalfoundry, and of course, store.digitalfoundry.net if you fancy wearing apparel with our logos on it. But that's all from us for this week. Thanks as ever for watching and supporting Digital Foundry, and yes, inevitably we'll see you next week.